Hello and welcome to this video tutorial. In this video I will show you how to create an UI with two cameras. One camera is the normal 3D view. A second one acts as a 2D camera to provide some overlay UI elements. You can also get the similar effect with GUI text layers, but with the multi-camera technique you have more options to realize almost the same effect. UTouch comes with an example scene where you can study the multi-camera setup, but for this tutorial I begin from scratch. As always, I start with the input manager. First, we create two camera objects. Our main view camera is a perspective camera and uses a culling mask with a layer of name UTouch. If you prefer other names, you can name your layers like you want. The overlay camera uses the orthographic projection for the 2D effect. To see the rendering of two cameras at the same time, we have to set the clear flags options of the camera that has a higher depth to don't clear. This means the camera renders only the content of its view frustum and doesn't fill the background with a color or skybox. We use and set the culling mask to the layer named GUI. Now let's place some game objects with a button script attached to our layers and place them in an appropriate way. I place the cube and the plane on the UTouch layer and two spheres on the GUI layer, so you can see how this combination works. We have to tell the UTouch input manager that we use two different cameras for interaction, and we want to make sure that each camera can only interact with the elements from the rendering layer. The fact that the camera doesn't render an object doesn't mean that this object couldn't be tracked by raycasting. This is a common pitfall. So on the one side you tell your camera which layers to render, and on the other side you tell your camera which layers for raycasting are used. Most of the time both layers are the same. We have to add for every camera UTouch should use one camera config component to our input manager. So for our example, we add two config components. Just drag your camera object on the cam property field to define which camera the configuration use. With the layers checked field, you define the layer or layers the camera raycast against objects. The order a camera config is added has some implications to the raycasting. The UTouch input manager passes through its added camera config components list and does the raycasting in a sequential order. At the moment a raycast for one touch detects a hit, this touch can't be used for another raycast by a later camera. To prevent some confusion with the depth settings of your camera component, it's always best practice to add the topmost camera as the first camera config and so on. So you assure that the order of raycasting matches the order of your visual camera layering. We also have to define the main rendering camera on the input manager. This camera has a special meaning for UTouch and is used for different calculations. It has to be the camera you use for your main rendering and not for some overlay. In a single camera setup, you don't have to set this explicit, as the first active camera is used when you leave this field empty. So, for our example, we have to select the camera main as our main rendering camera, as this is the perspective camera that renders our scene. To prevent any confusion when you use multi-camera setups, you should define the camera explicit. If the main rendering camera isn't used by one of the camera configs, a virtual camera config component is added at runtime. When you add a camera config component with the same camera as the main rendering camera, then the layers checked from the camera config is used for this camera, so the camera config overrides the settings from the input manager. When we configured all, we can test the scene. If you have problems with the proper display of the touch visualization, just check if the rendering layer is the topmost layer of your scene. In our multicam example scene, you can see how the game objects are located within the scene, but are properly rendered separately, and the raycasting works like we expect. Thanks for watching this video.